I don't know too much about nutrition. You know, how many grams of protein in a protein bar is good? What are trans fats and what do they actually do to you? Humans will always have a need to learn more and communicate and hear from other people and communicate their own story and engage with the world that way. What do we do in this world where the public faces these issues without expertise? Today on the We Can Solve This podcast, I'm gonna freewheel it a little bit. I was supposed to have a guest on for the last 2 weeks, but that guest is Scott Lincecum, who is an expert on trade policy at the Cato Institute. And of course, in the news, trade policy is just everywhere. So he's been pulled onto actual media places, the news, all that kind of stuff. So we've had to reschedule several times. I'll have him on soon. But over the course of the last few weeks since our first episode, I've just been thinking more and more about how do we, as people who are creatives, as storytellers, as people who can communicate ideas, how do we actually have an impact? And even if, I think generally anybody, even if you're not a professional filmmaker or whatever, we all are wanting to have an impact. We all see things that are happening in the world in front of us, and particularly us in a democratic society. We want to have some way of believing that we can input into the world and push that needle somehow. And just oftentimes we don't know how. Or I think in particular this generation, we are feeling actually nihilistic about it. And we are feeling like we can't, and we're giving up on it. And we're feeling totally despondent and just giving up on this concept of a free, liberal, democratic society in that way. That's when we start resorting to violence or, rioting and destroying things, rather than this really foundational belief in rationality, reason, people understanding and thinking, and that ideas competing in the world can actually win out instead of resorting to violence and power and censorship and shutting people out or shutting people down. We can actually win by being communicators and storytellers and, peaceful people. And so in thinking about that, I wanted to start really thinking about this framework. Part of it, like I've said before, comes out of just, realizing that there are different stakes, different stakeholders in a lot of political issues, particularly criminal justice reform, A Clean Slate being the film that I made, and then wanting it to help impact the people, particularly in Wisconsin, who have that bill in their legislature. But the legislators saying, it's not really like a grassroots thing is going to change it. It's more that they use legislation and votes and resolutions and amendments as currencies inside the halls of their legislature to actually trade and slowly move things around by making deals. And so it's not like I have an impact in that room necessarily. But I do have to expand then my understanding of what it is that my job is if I want to have an impact. And that means orders of magnitudes before it reaches the legislature. I have to think about how I'm going to impact the voters, right? That's one of those impactful ways, reaching the voters. So that way the people who sit in the halls of power maybe are composed of different people. I know that's a huge step away from thinking the film is just going to immediately convince somebody. It's a long game. It's a long game situation. I am competing with several millions of other people. And I don't even live in Wisconsin, so thinking that my film can change a Wisconsin legislature might be a little ambitious. But all right, let's start by thinking about the regular voter. Who is the regular voter? That is a question that, I've had to think about a lot with a lot of the works I've been doing. One of the things that I realize is that for me, I've been in the field of economics since high school. I've been really invested in it, read tons of books and treatises and all these kind of things. Almost got a minor in economics in college. Took quite a few classes in the economics department there, even though I was in the film department as a major. Just always been interested in how the world works. And at this point, I feel educated enough to feel that whenever I hear things in the news, when I hear things from elected officials talking about economics, I always feel like I know enough to disagree. I know enough to disagree with any kind of voice and stand up for what I really believe in. And that is a unique place to be in. And when we think about the issues ahead of us, like tariffs and free trade, or regulations and whatnot. A lot of people don't have that capacity because they didn't invest a decade or more like I have in terms of investing into that issue. And that's not wrong. That is actually generally what the public is going to be like on any given issue, because there's only a few experts and everybody else is not an expert. But I had to kind of think about, what does it actually feel like to be in those shoes then? Because like for me, like I've always known economics, I've always studied this stuff. All right, what is a topic that I don't know that well? And what does that end up looking like for me? And one of those things is like sports. Up until recently, I didn't really know too much about sports. I got really into football, go Detroit Lions. I got really into basketball, go Pistons. And Detroit's having a renaissance, so I kind of kept up a little bit with baseball and hockey, but I don't know those sports as well. And what I realized thinking about this was my lack of knowledge in the sports world, particularly, let's say, basketball even. I'm loosely interested in basketball. I know a little bit about the Detroit Pistons players, but I don't know all these other names that exist. I don't know the impact of this trade, or what the impact of this signing will do, and what the draft should look like, and how will this impact this and that. And what I end up doing is I end up just relying on, if I have an opinion about those things, I end up relying on Stephen A. Smith, or Inside Basketball, or these news media faces that say that they are experts in the field, right? So I'm very reliant on them. That's what it feels like to be a member of the public who can vote and contribute on issues, but may not be experts on it. And again, that is the norm. That's fine. That's what we have to expect in many ways. But that means the people who sit in those seats, the people like Shaq sitting as a host of Inside Basketball and Inside NBA, he sits at a very powerful position in the sense of like he helps create the public understanding of any particular thing that's going on in the world of the NBA. And recently he said a lot of contradictory things about the Pistons, and it turns out he doesn't even watch the Pistons. He didn't know that Chauncey Billups was not the head coach. And I don't even know much better, but I knew that at least. And here he is spreading around what is, in that way, disinformation. So when we start thinking about the framework of the public, what is the public experience in terms of these really important issues like criminal justice reform, like the economy, like the environment? It's going to be like one of these topics that any of us have where we aren't experts in. We don't have the education or the background to respond to people's voices in the public in any way that could press back and be independent from politicians and big professional thought makers. Instead, we are reliant on them. I think a better example, perhaps, that has a bit more weight is nutrition. I don't know too much about nutrition. How many grams of protein in a protein bar is good? What are trans fats and what do they actually do to you? Is butter good or bad, right? That was a thing that was in the checkout aisle magazines for a decade. And I don't know enough to be independent from the people who publish articles and post them online and in magazines. So I'm reliant, and that's how the public is. So when we think about our role as media makers, as storytellers, I think our role is going to be permanent in the sense that humans will always have a need to learn more and communicate and hear from other people and communicate their own story and engage with the world that way. We're always going to have that need regardless of whether there's AI or other technology that cheapens it or makes the cost of producing lower or whatever. We're always going to need it. What do we do? What do we do in this world where the public faces these issues without expertise? In our first episode, in our conversation with Nolan, we're talking about housing politics. The housing crisis affects us all, but we all might not be experts on city planning, on land use regulations, on zoning code reform, on the economics of the supply of housing, right? We don't have to be experts on it, but there are levels of which it's going to affect us, and how do we build a successful political movement to make a housing affordable for the next generation? And Nolan said, flood the zone. He kept saying, flood the zone, because there are several things. One, in his world, in academia and in policy overall, there are think tanks and academics who write really interesting papers about things they're researching. A good example is Nolan actually authored a study on Houston. Houston is famously a city that has no zoning in its borders, largely because it's been put up to an actual referendum. If you didn't know, zoning normally in most cities across the country gets instituted by just a council vote. It's not by a referendum of the people who live there. Houston famously put it up for a referendum, so everybody had to go vote for zoning, and it's failed to pass, which, in my personal opinion, I believe is good. No zoning needed. I don't believe that we need zoning particularly. I think it's a bad policy. And he did a study about Houston in which he wanted to know, does zoning actually have an impact? Because we could say, all right, you need a minimum lot size. The size of property that you buy has to be at least this amount of land. And if you make it bigger, obviously you're basically excluding people from being able to buy a cheaper plot of land because it's smaller, right? You have to buy this much land. If he found listings that were all kind of not bell curved, but just like immediately starts at that floor, then we can say, yes, that policy is actually having an impact in terms of stopping people from buying a little smaller plots of land that they want, but it's just illegal to buy so. He does this whole study. He looks, he does all this research, pours all this time into reading this stuff, and he finds whatever comes out. Yeah, he finds actual data that says, yeah, it's actually having an impact. This law is stopping people from buying smaller plots of land that could be more affordable to them. But how does the public get to interact with that? In short, the public doesn't, because we didn't flood the zone. That information that he's spent time researching, it's published into a policy paper. And where does it go? Do people know about it? Do people hear about it? Does the public know about it and put it in their heads like I would about like whatever some expert says about basketball? Like, oh, now I know Jokic is a really good basketball player, right? Someone has to tell me that. I rely on experts to kind of give me that feedback, even though I don't really watch, I don't watch him play, right? That has to get into the public's head in the same blunt, broad way that the information about that is, or information about how is butter healthy, a healthier version than hydrogenated oils, right? That information, that what we call a meme, a figment of ideas that builds up an identity, a culture. Those individual ideas have to be spread out. They have to be given to people, and they have to make an impact. So with Nolan's paper, it doesn't go anywhere in that sense because people aren't spreading the information. That could be making media about it. Maybe that's making a video essay about it. Maybe that's making a film, a short documentary about the towns that he studied, and maybe he hosts it and he goes there, we're traveling, we're visiting, and all that kind of stuff. There's no, I don't know, it's not printed in magazines everywhere necessarily. It's not, put into podcasts more, right? There's tons of things that could be done with the information that he has discovered in his research that has not yet been done. And that's not a problem of Nolan. Nolan is busy, he's doing a lot of other work. But that's just an example of there is information about important issues that the public doesn't have a real understanding of, and what they're reliant on are the experts that are just loosely out there in the ether saying things about the general topic. And what that results in is something like broad branding of political parties. The Republicans are just known as the hard-on-crime party. The Democrats are known as kind of the liberal, socially moral party, right? There's these vague brandings that are so broad, and then when people show up to vote in November, they just kind of base their opinion on that. I know a lot of people who just, I've always voted Republican, my family's voted Republican, I'm just gonna vote for the Republican. It doesn't really matter. I just think that we need the strong discipline party this year, and to do these things. They don't really know much more about the people who are running for office. Again, that is the norm. That is going to be the general way that the public operates. But we, as media makers and communicators, have to deal with that. And if we care about an issue, we have to focus on making the pieces of media that are going to fill the gaps and get into people's heads. Things like the trade policy. I'll be talking to Scott, hopefully, within a week or two. But there are things that I've heard from him that are really interesting. One thing is he describes why it is that the president has so much power over tariffs. If you know anything about constitutional law, Congress makes the laws and the executive just enforces it. The executive doesn't make laws, but here we have an issue of tariffs and free trade or trade agreements that are almost entirely brokered by the president or being used by the president. And the president is claiming that he has emergency powers to just throw on tariffs anywhere he wants and at any rate he wants. And Scott says that it's because after the Smoot-Hawley tariff back in the 30s, which was a total failure and the economy collapsed even harder, Congress felt that all of their individual states had too much of a special interest into a certain industry. Maybe it's a Great Plains state having a really big agricultural lobby in that state, so they want to shut down trade with the outside world. In the US particularly, we actually block trade of sugar from outside our borders. So we actually don't get to have as much sugar coming in, and we rely much more on corn syrup because of that. And so because of those kind of state-based industry special interests, they felt that the president has a national, voting public, and so he'll be so much more insulated from those special interests that are state-based, and we should give the tariff powers to the president. And on top of that, it kind of matches with his foreign policy role as commander-in-chief, right? So they thought it would be a good fit. And here we are in 2025, and the president has crazy amount of power over our economy by using tariffs and just putting tariffs on unilaterally without a single vote from Congress. See, that information that I heard from a single podcast about Scott, that's in my head now. That should be out there more. I think the voting public doesn't quite know much about the process of legislation, the process of government, the process of the economy. And we could be doing a lot more to get out there and give more people a knowledge of things that are going on. It's tough. I don't think any of this is easy, but when you consider what does the public know about? What does everybody kind of know about? It's like everybody knows about a certain trend on the internet, a meme or something like that, or celebrity happenings. Somehow we all as a community, as a national community, as an international community, can gain an understanding of particular things going on with certain celebrities, particular things, fact patterns even of this event that happened. So it's possible in a sense. Obviously, the public kind of wants to consume that stuff because it's gripping, it's entertaining, or whatnot. But I think that's actually then the playbook for us. If something is entertaining, it's interesting, it gives me a sense of fulfillment, it gives me a sense of involvement with a community. Oh, I learned this thing, now I get to feel like I'm more part of this community. Like sports, for example. I know a lot more about the Detroit Lions, so I feel like I'm a part of the Detroit Lions fan community because I can talk about it more, right? There's a motivation for the public to understand stuff and get involved with something. So in a similar sense, I think that's part of politics. The key issues that we care about, we have to kind of rethink it around how can we make it rewarding and fulfilling and valuable to want to engage with this issue. I don't think that's going to mean fear. I don't think we should base our advocacy around fear necessarily. I think it's about building community. And again, that goes back to our first episode with Nolan. He talks about how the YIMBY movement, this movement for legalizing more housing, has made a lot of strides because they've built real community. They have happy hours, so they just kind of invite everybody, come hang out at a bar, we'll chat, we'll meet each other. Hey, we'll go on walking tours of our town and get to know our town a bit better. We'll go on biking tours, so we kind of see the biking lanes that exist in our town and say, hey, is this a safe city for cyclists and pedestrians, or is it totally focused on the priorities of car drivers, right? They're doing these events that build community. And if you are a part of it, you immediately start feeling like, oh, hey, I have more friends. I'm going out to an event. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to meet people. And also we're all together in some kind of movement. That's, I think, a real serious playbook for us who care about issues. It's going to rely on building community. Communities need media. Communities need stories to build up their identity. And that is where I start seeing my role. Let's say like housing affordability. We know that some issues like banning this construction of new housing is going to absolutely destroy the market for buying housing. It's like if you banned the construction of new cars, what do you think is going to happen to the car market? We're going to sit on an older car market, older stock of cars. We're going to continue consuming those cars. More people are going to need cars overall as the population grows or whatever. And we're going to be sitting on a stock of cars that slowly depreciates, deteriorates. Some cars get totaled, so they leave the stock of cars, and the price of the cars goes up, right? So we know this conceptual thing about how the economics of housing work, but then we have to actually make content that says, in this community, in Lexington, Kentucky, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in Seattle, Washington, in New York City, here are some specific things that are happening so that you who live in those communities can actually plug in to this philosophy or theory about, or this understanding of how the world works. So when we think of our job as people who care about political issues and have the skill of storytelling and the skill of making media that connects with people, I think we have to kind of see a broader picture there. That actually, for me, actually makes it feel a bit more specific. I'm not going to make a documentary about zoning. Maybe I can make a documentary about how this particular policy, like, the ban on accessory dwelling units, ADUs, which are like converted garages or smaller homes built on properties, how the ban of those houses impacts someone, like particularly people who want to take care of their aging parents who are getting older and maybe less mobile. And it would be better to have them live on their property in an ADU near them rather than sending them off to a nursing home or something like that where they don't have the same familial connection, right? That's a real story that I was actually trying to make a documentary about in Kentucky. Unfortunately, the subject didn't feel comfortable sharing their story because it was way too personal for them. But that's a real story that we could have told, connect with not only that community specifically, but also connect with people around the country, around the world, who are experiencing this disconnection from their own family members because they can't find an affordable place to live near them. That would help connect people to this broader topic and build community. And then there's also the work as not just the people who make the video file at the end of the day, but actually, hey, I have this video file, this film, I want to screen it today, I want to screen it next week, I want to bring it to this city, I want to show it to these people, I want to connect with this organization, we'll screen it to the people in their email newsletter to come show up, right? Now we see the media we make as tools to have impact because now we're connecting with people. That is, in my mind, the framework of the playbook for having impact. The vast general public doesn't have to understand these very big, very complex issues in an expert way, but we are trying to have as many touch points with them to give them the impression of the issue at hand in as best and thorough and as connective of a way as possible. That, to me, is the playbook. I just think everybody who has a care on an issue to really think through that you are different from the public that you need buy-in from. You who care about this issue and know a lot about it, you might be able to go, into the academic field and do some work. You might be able to talk with academics, but that's not the only job. The rest of the job that we have, if we have an advocacy role, is to talk with the public, and the public has a very different impression of these issues at hand. In terms of the tools that we have available to us, I just think it's always wide open, and it's kind of limited by, I guess, the nonprofit directors above us who may not understand the tools available to us, right? That is a battle of its own. But if anything, if this episode gets to anybody, this is a call to expand our vision of what media is. Media is not just something you throw up on a YouTube graveyard and let it just sit there. Media, every piece of media, particularly well-connecting, emotionally driving pieces that can really inspire people, all of those pieces of media are tools, individual tools. And if you start building a library of content about something, about a particular issue you care about, each one of those things can be shared, can be brought up, and not just shared on social media, but like, all right, let's go set up a screening. Let's go email people. Let's go connect with other organizations that do similar stuff on the same topic and maybe agree with us on this issue, and co-host a screening. Combine it with other things like a happy hour. If we're going to do a happy hour event with Abundant Housing Michigan, you should maybe screen a piece of media right beforehand. Maybe it takes place at a bar that has a projector, like Speciation here in Grand Rapids. Project it in the beginning. Someone speaks in the beginning. Thank you guys for coming. Here's the piece we've been working on. And I thank you for coming. Share this around after we screen it today. Here it is. Boom. Screen the 3-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute short documentary about the issue. Everybody kind of gets a sense of it, and then continue with the happy hour. Now you've got the community there. Everybody's talking about it. Everyone smashes ideas together, and oh, I really like this documentary, and I can probably talk to this person, get it over there, and now you're really getting this piece out. So now we have the option of putting it on a YouTube graveyard or putting a little bit of energy into it, but getting people to show up to an event and having FaceTime with people and having a deeper impact with those people who hopefully will be inspired to continue doing that. And if you're sitting at a nonprofit that has 10, 20 years of media content, find the gems that are in there and bring them back to life. Something you made 5 years ago. 5 years ago, what was that? That was 2020. That was the pandemic. That wasn't that far ago. A piece you made about trade and free trade and tariff policy back then is still valuable today. Bring it back up. Make a update to it maybe, but it's a library of content that is each individually great piece of tools that can be brought out and flood the zone. And flooding the zone doesn't mean making more content all the time. It just means people should be interacting with more content all the time. That's this transformation I've been going through in the last year and a half, thinking about how my media can become a bigger tool. Right now, a clean slate, it's on streaming, but I'm not doing enough to promote it. I'm not bringing it around the country yet. After the film festival started, I haven't put out energy into contact the ACLU in this state, contact the Innocence Project, contact Prison Reform Fellowship, contact these organizations and get co-screenings with them around the country. I haven't done that yet. And that's something I should be doing because this film has the potential to connect with more people and show people how the impact of a criminal record can be destructive to an individual, that individual's family, the individual's community, and then on net, the economy overall, because we have a bunch of people who cannot put their productive energy into the world in a way that actually works, right? Because they're stopped from it by having a record. And by showing this and connecting with organizations that can partner with this, and then, like I said, maybe we have an event around it. Maybe we have, a little bit of a happy hour afterwards, or just a little bit of a meet and greet afterwards in the lobby of a theater or whatnot. These pieces can be so much more impactful. And we, individually, as people who care about issues and want to communicate these things, really do have a pathway to having impact on the issues we care about. It's easy to lose faith. It's easy to totally get cynical about the issues ahead of us, especially when, tariff policy right now, tariff policy is led by one human being on this planet right now. And that human being does not generally listen to a lot of other people in a way that are actually going to sway that person, especially on an issue that this person cares about, as this person has cared about for several decades, trying to shut down trade in America. It can be very difficult to say, yes, I should put energy into this issue when even the legislatures who are voted to be the legislation in our country, they don't even press any of their power over the president to do anything. But expand your horizon, expand your time horizon, expand your vision for how you're going to have an impact. Okay, maybe the pieces that you're going to do aren't going to exactly land at Trump's feet and he's going to change his heart suddenly. But maybe it's get it in front of some of these people that have an impact, Honestly, Joe Rogan is a guy who kind of just listens to a lot of things, and hey, maybe if you can get in front of a podcaster who has an impact, has a big range, that's one win. Having it even in a local sense, bringing it to people in your community and building a real unique culture in your own town about this issue because they actually have community, connection over this issue, that's another win. That is a win. We just have to focus on doing it because we care about this issue. There's no way around it. And thankfully, we do live in a conceptually democratic world where when you have enough public interest in buying on an issue, you can actually adjust the world as it is. So that's just my freewheeling thoughts about this. We're going to revisit this a lot more when we talk with other academics and experts. But I'd say just keep, for me, that's been really helpful, keeping that in mind of how does the public interact with issues. It is loose, it is broad, it isn't expertise. That's not bad, it's just the reality. And if we can find a way to inject our message in a way that really connects with them and motivates them to want to be a part of the issue that we're talking about, and not everybody's going to do it, but we do need enough people to do it, then we can actually move the needle. Just like I don't know enough about nutrition or other sports or science. I don't know much about science. I don't know much about space exploration. And my impression that I'm getting about those things comes from media, comes from media makers like ourselves. And so we have to play our role a lot stronger, a lot more bold, and a lot more productively. And it's only then that we can really solve this. So that's the episode.